This is Abe Friedhanser from Awards Watch, and I'm so thrilled to be speaking with Alex Pritz about one of the best documentaries of the year, The Territory. How are you, Alex?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Abe.
Of course, of course. I was looking at your website while I was, doing a little bit of research for this interview following having seen the film, and I like that you said that you're interested in humans' relationship with the natural world. And that strikes me as like the perfect catalyst to this film's subject matter. But I'm curious if you can tell me how it is that you got to Brazil and this focus.
Yeah, a lot of my work focuses on this. I didn't study film, actually. I studied an interdisciplinary program in environmental science, philosophy. And so, these complicated issues where humans are living in and part of the world. We're not separate from it, but we rely on it in order to survive, and yet we're at the same time, destroying large parts of it creates all these different types of conflicts. And so, looking at the people living on the front lines of a lot of these issues is something I've been focused on for a little while. This particular story came into my life when I read about Nadinha Bandeira, the amazing 60-year-old activist at the center of our film, who has spent 40 years defending the environment, the rainforest, indigenous rights, and doing it in a part of the world where almost everybody is against her. And so in 2018, as Bolsonaro was running for election, I reached out to her and said, look, I love what you're doing. I think you're one of the most inspiring people I've ever heard of, and your life could get turned upside down if he wins the election. Could I come and meet you? And so I borrowed, $1,000 from two friends, and that got me a ticket to Brazil, and one thing led to another.
Wow. And I mean, it feels like the Uru Ewawao people are very open to you and to having, cameras there, but also they have plenty of reasons not to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Through Nadinha was introduced to the indigenous Uruwao people, who are the defenders of the largest area of intact rainforest in this part of the Amazon. And they're extremely distrustful and skeptical of outside journalists and media, me in particular, to start, because of the way that they've been treated historically by the media and by outside forces. I remember when I first got to the Uruguay, and it was before I even really started filming, there was a linguist who had come and was meeting with them to try to help write down their language. Tupi Kawahiva is a language spoken by something in the hundreds of people left on Earth. And so the members of the different villages came together and sat and discussed the proposal to write down their language. And they came back and said, no, we're really not into that, because if you write down our language, we know what happens next. We'll have to pay to speak our language. And we don't want that. We're not interested. And for me, that was this really important realization that, like, holy shit, so much has been taken and exploited and stolen from this community by people who look like me, who behave culturally like me, who speak like me. And so on the flip side, this idea of ownership over your own narrative, over your own culture and your story was going to be really important going forwards. And that informed a lot of the participatory way in which we set up the territory.
And you also share a cinematography credit with a member, which is very, very cool.
Yeah, I'm proud to have worked alongside Tangai Uruwao, who shot major portions of the film from his perspective. And it was a huge learning experience for me. I came into this thinking I'm also a cinematographer and shoot a lot of my own material, and thought, I have a really strict idea of how I want the aesthetics for this film to look and feel. And when COVID came along, I didn't have physical access to members of the Uruguay. For over a year, I couldn't meet them, couldn't enter their territory. And so for that year, Tangai and other members of the community picked up cameras and filmed themselves. And the footage they came back with was so much better than any of the stuff I had shot prior. It was a really important lesson for me, that seeing things in that unmediated, unfiltered, raw format from the actual protagonist's hands and through their eyes just was a better experience for the audience, period. And so really opened up a lot of creative possibilities for us, as well as, important ways in which the film got restructured as a co-production, so the community received an equal portion of the profits of the sale of the film, and became a much more equitable enterprise overall, I think.
Yeah, as I'm thinking back to some of those scenes, I'm picturing two radically different documentaries and just the style. One of them is Catfish, which obviously thematically is nothing like this, and the other is Man on Wire, because the idea is that you're sort of just you're following what's happening, you're in it. It's not a documentary in the sense of we're interviewing people, we're talking, it's that we're here, this is our lives. And also there's something thrilling and intense and it has really high stakes about it.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing we knew we wanted from the very beginning, that stayed true the whole time, was the idea that this needed to be a present tense film, that we weren't going to tell the audience something had happened last week. You needed to be there experiencing it alongside them, because this is an active conflict with really high stakes. This is a life or death thing for people living in the Amazon, and for all of us really that want to continue to live on this beautiful planet. That forest needs to remain standing. It's a life or death matter for our whole species. And so trying to convey that in a way that brought the audience there, through the cinematography, through the sound design, made it as immersive as possible. That was one of the main goals.
It's also very poignant and upsetting to learn of the death of one of the activists, throughout this film. And I'm sure that that was a very, powerful experience just in the process of this whole thing.
Yeah, that was it was, I think, by far the most difficult moment in production. This is a community of 150-ish people. And so when you lose somebody, a 32-year-old man, who's a father of two children, who's a teacher in a local school, a son, a husband, it leaves a huge hole. Somebody who's really active in the territorial surveillance of their land, it left a massive hole, and was really difficult for our team, obviously for the community. And for a while, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to continue, just because it became so risky, so emotionally difficult to even talk about some of these things. But through that grief, I think we were able to come together as a team and realize that the best way we understood to honor him and his work was to try to tell the world about what it was that he was part of and what he was fighting for.
Absolutely. And I think it's also sort of jarring how flagrantly people just sort of show up and say, like, we're taking this land, we're burning it. And it's obviously, I mean, we're both American. I think that we're seeing a similar, calls to take back what you want and all these things, from right-wing factions within our own government. I'm sure those parallels are not lost on you or on anyone viewing, I hope on anyone viewing this film.
Yeah, I mean, we see it now in America with this, nostalgia for the good old days that were good for some, horrible for others. Uh, and we see that in present day Brazil, in these frontier communities who have adopted the American ideology, these ideas of manifest destiny, of divine right to the land, the idea that land is somehow empty, void of people or life, until you, as a settler, come along and chart your maps of it. All of those are complete falsehoods, but they are the founding mythology of America. The story of pilgrims, westward expansion of the United States. And you see that reflected in these Brazilian settlers in, their physical iconography, their cowboy hats, their big belt buckles. They adore the American West. But it's also a betrayal of these much deeper forms of admiration that they have for America as a fellow colonial project, that did away with a lot of native land and killed a lot of indigenous people here in North America.
Yeah. And it's also interesting the parallel to, COVID-19 and the idea of, well, this is a people that's dealt with illnesses being brought and not having immunity, all these things. And it's so fascinating to see how they approach this pandemic.
Yeah. And, through that, without speaking for indigenous people, I'm not indigenous. One of the things I was really impressed with was the resilience and the resistance, really, that the Uruguay displayed, in spite of all these challenges. And COVID-19 and the response to it is a perfect example of that. When the disease arrived, the elders in the community remembered vividly in 1981 when they came into first contact with the Brazilian state. They were forcibly assimilated, went from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to existing as part of the Brazilian state, more or less. that brought a huge amount of foreign diseases, tuberculosis, measles, that killed more than half their population within 2 years. And so the historical memory of that loomed large for the community. And they said, look, we're taking this super seriously. Nobody into or out of our territory for a year until everybody's vaccinated. We're in full quarantine. And that return to the land, the return to, self-reliance, especially for the younger generation like Bitate, meant that they took matters into their own hands. They were using cameras and drones and technology to document the invasions that they had been experiencing, and led to these huge breakthroughs in terms of their ability to fight back against these foreign invaders.
And I know the film has had a very positive reception at Sundance and being acquired by National Geographic, et cetera. What has the response been like in Brazil?
We started at a Tudo Verdade, a Brazilian film festival. It was probably the most emotional screening I think we've had. About half the audience was indigenous. And to see other indigenous communities recognizing the Uruguay, quite a small, 150 people, but to see the way that they have fought back and militantly resisted this encroachment was really moving to be part of. We had a theatrical release in Brazil just 3 weeks before people went to the polls in the latest presidential election. That was a real goal of ours, to have this film be out before the next presidential election and available in Brazil, so that people could head to the polls thinking about, the past 4 years and what Bolsonaro's political legacy has meant for the environment, for indigenous people, and bringing that into the political conversation. And we're really excited in 2023 to have a much wider rollout. It'll be on Disney Plus beginning of the year in Brazil, and then community screenings in a lot of places that don't have internet or access to streaming services, and trying to make the conversation as broad and accessible as possible.
That's great. And I know it's also on Disney Plus already in the United States, which is great because I think Disney, it's a place you go for Marvel and Star Wars. And sometimes you can go for some, heavier, important nonfiction films as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope that, it's been really cool in our theatrical release in the United States to see how many young people were actually coming out to the theaters. Our protagonist is this 18-year-old indigenous leader who's just an absolute visionary, using drones and media in these really sophisticated ways. And I think there's a message of hope in that young people are taking control and taking the reins, and are capable of leading all of us into the next century.
Do you have a next project that you're already working on?
I have some ideas I'm really excited about, but I have also just put so much into this film that it's my first feature documentary I've ever directed, and I just got to see this thing through. It's my baby.
Yeah, no, it's great that it made the Doc NYC shortlist. I'm hoping it'll also make the Oscar shortlist. It really, just because it's a really, really fantastic film. And I'm curious also, what are some other great documentaries that you've seen recently that you would recommend to people who want something else to look at after The Territory?
Oh my gosh. So many great films this year. Brazilian film, The Last Forest, is another film made in a participatory way with the community about an indigenous group, the Yanomami. Mija, I really love, by Isabel Castro, that's out this year. So many good films. I mean, we're awash in them this year. It's a really amazing year for documentaries.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with me, and good luck with this film and whatever comes next.
Thank you so much, Abe.